Welcome back. I was talking with an Urban Transportation Commission meeting a couple of years ago, describing what we were working on, when I noticed at the end of the meeting, the chairwoman kind of slipped away. And I was wondering what her thoughts were. And so I followed her out the building, talked to her. We got to her car, and she turned to me and said, "Susan, when I hear you talk, I think about money. I see money, and we don't have any money. The city of Austin has not even enough money to build sidewalks. Why and how could we ever build a network for micromobility modes? So it's never going to happen. There will never be the money." And I was really kind of shocked, because to me, it was so obvious that what we were talking about is relatively inexpensive and certainly cheaper than expanding roads. And so I realized I had failed to make the case. And it was up to me to develop a financial case for lean mobility. And I began working on it. And that very night, I started writing a document, how to build lean networks with the crumbs of major transportation projects. And so that led to the work of this chapter. By the end of this chapter, I want you to understand and really believe, not only can your city afford it, but your city cannot afford not to create a lean infrastructure for micromobility. The cost savings are so dramatic, and it obviates the need for all kinds of hyper expensive mega $1 million projects that aren't going to solve your problems, but will cost a lot of money. So let me show you the share that I worked on. So this is what some of your roads may look like. It's what a lot of roads that I've seen look like. And when you look at that, you just know adding one more lane to that traffic is not going to solve the problem. It won't solve anything. So how do you approach this? And our approach is, how, for the crumbs of major transportation projects, can you provide an infrastructure that will entice and draw at least 20 to 25% of drivers off these main roads, main highways, and onto a parallel, largely parallel, alternative, low emission infrastructure. And when you do, here is the financial model that goes with it. I created it around baseball. I like baseball. So I call it the financial home run for lean mobility. And it's a completely different way of thinking about municipal finance. Now, since you're a mayor or you're an advisor to mayors, you know a lot about municipal finance. And I promise you not to bore you with this, but I have to spend one solid minute on it for you to understand this is not the way to finance your lean infrastructure. Typically, cities have two kinds of budgets. They have operating budgets and capital budgets. Operating budgets are how they pay people, pay staff, keep libraries open, operate city hall, whatever else your city does, build roads. Now, however, building roads is actually done with a capital improvements budget. So that's the other side of it, also called the CIP, capital improvements. And these are items that are construction related items typically, and they may take years to develop and finance and build, and then have a life that goes on for a decade or decades. Typically, cities do this at a glacial pace. Someone has the idea to, say, expand a road. Then that idea needs to be taken throughout various processes for people to decide whether it's a good idea or not. And then if the city decides to proceed with it, they will develop a budget for bonds. So voters will vote on whether or not they want to spend money to finance this particular project. And so the city has to get ready for that election and have that election. And then after the election, it needs to once again figure out, what does each project cost? Can it be afforded still within the cap on the capital improvements project budget? And then it needs to be estimated, project bid, construction begins, it finally opens to the public. Now that process can take, well, it will take years. From the moment it is a gleam in the transportation engineer's eye to the moment that project is open is not unusual to take 6 to 7 years. It takes eons to do these types of projects in this type of way. We don't have eons. We have unemployment now. We have climate crisis now. We have demands for inclusion now, and there's no reason to wait on doing these things. So to show that it can happen a different way, we came up with 4 pivotal actions that will take you to this financial home run. The first we've referenced, and it's called repurpose existing assets. It could be any number of things: off-road paths, bridges, rights of way, easements, paved roads, shoulders of roads, aqueducts, forgotten tunnels, all kinds of things can be repurposed. And to do this means you have to break through that invisible wall that causes you to think, oh, but no, this is for conventional cars. And when you start to realize the road is for everyone, and you start to remember that it's about serving people, you can start opening your mind to how you repurpose existing assets. The second piece is to build it with the crumbs of major transportation projects. And here we're recommending arbitrarily that a city invest 10% of all of its major project funding in lean infrastructure. And this seems reasonable in that 10% will go so far with these kinds of projects. A typical road, 4-lane road to build might cost for conventional cars, $4 million, $6 million or more for a mile. You can build a mile of this kind of an infrastructure for $100,000, $200,000, even more, but it will still be a fraction of what it would cost if you were trying to do that for roads and accommodate the same kind of volume of drivers and passengers as you would with a conventional road. So you have to think differently, repurpose, and then get some money out of the giant pots of funds that cities and states spend on transportation. The third one is to intercept developments, to quickly, as soon as we're off this Zoom call, begin to think about what are the developments that are being planned and developed today that could be intercepted, where this kind of infrastructure could be included. Not at the taxpayer cost typically, but at the developer's cost. We are talking about all public and private sector developments. And we're also talking about not inconveniencing or stretching out the timeline for projects. In fact, the opposite. You want to incentivize developers to include this infrastructure in their developments, because in the end, it will, in all likelihood, belong to the city, and the city will gain this valuable asset without having to have used taxpayer dollars to pay for it. So for developers, you want to help them, support them in doing this, fast track it if they're including this kind of infrastructure, require it in all new subdivisions, get with all mixed use developers and see how you can include this. We have been talking to one, and it's very exciting because it's a little late to include this from the ground up in a mixed use developments, but it's not too late to include it altogether. And that's what we're working on now. And this will give that development really, frankly, a leg up and an ability to shine amidst all the other options that people have, because it will be welcoming to bicyclists, e-bikes, NEVs, pedicabs, all of the types of vehicles, golf carts, that will make this a friendlier, lower cost development where people can get around within it. They'll put up some no through traffic signs around it and keep the larger traffic off the road, which shouldn't be a problem. It's not on the way to anywhere large, but to get in there immediately. I want to say too that I have been told at certain points that it is, quote, too late for us to go in there and intercept a development that is already planned. And 2 years later, I'm told it's too late. It wasn't too late 2 years earlier. It's just that no one wanted to bother with it, mess with it, and no one believed in it. But the world has changed from the scooters that landed and proved that people would take lower cost, stigma-free, low emission, low speed modes to a recession with no end in sight, where people are having to operate differently and work differently, and where they've given up old habits, and maybe, just maybe, they can give up the love of single occupant vehicles commuting long commutes to get to an office where perhaps on that Tuesday they don't even need to be. So a family could give up one car out of two and replace it with low speed modes or multiple modes. For the last piece, get shovel ready, let us go. For this last piece, let's move on to the next video. Thank you.